Man saves abandoned old lioness, but what happens next is shocking. The weak but unmistakable roar stopped Ernesto Ramírez in his tracks. After 12 years as a ranger in Kenya's Tsavo East Ecological Reserve, he instantly recognized the sound of a lion in distress. What he didn't expect was the heartbreaking scene before him. An elderly lioness, skeletal and covered in scars, huddled beneath a thorny bush just 30 meters from the main camp. Her eyes, once surely fierce, now showed a resignation that squeezed the Mexican man's heart. "Boom. What's wrong, little mama?" Ernesto murmured, crouching at a safe distance and observing through his professional binoculars. The lioness, which he later estimated to be about 16 years old, very advanced for a wild feline, showed clear signs of malnutrition. Her once golden coat now looked dull and uneven. An infected wound on her right hind leg explained why she couldn't hunt. But the saddest realization for Ernesto was understanding that she had been abandoned by her pride, something that occasionally happened with old or sick specimens that could no longer keep up with the group. "They've left her to die alone," he said to himself while activating his radio. Ernesto, originally from Sonora, Mexico, had come to Kenya almost by chance. Trained as a biologist at UNAM, he had traveled to Africa as a volunteer in 2010 for a 6-month project. 12 years later, he was still there, having become one of the most respected rangers in the reserve for his dedication and knowledge of big cat behavior. "Base to Ramírez, what's happening?" responded a voice with a marked Kenyan accent. I have a dying lioness near the main camp. She's old, injured, and abandoned. I need authorization to intervene and the veterinary team." There was silence on the radio. The official policy was non-interference with natural processes. If the pride had abandoned the lioness, it was part of the cycle of life in the savannah. "You know we can't, Makena. This lioness is 30 meters from where tourists sleep," Ernesto interrupted, knowing this argument would carry more weight than any emotional appeal. "If she dies here, we'll have hyenas and scavengers prowling the camp. Plus, she might be the famous Queen of Tsavo." This last part was an exaggeration, but not a complete lie. The lioness had the size and characteristics of the oldest lionesses in the reserve, though Ernesto couldn't be sure she was the legendary Queen, a lioness who had raised more than 20 cubs throughout her life and had become a tourist attraction. Though she hadn't been sighted for months. "Send photos," requested Makena, the reserve director. Ernesto took several photographs with his phone and sent them. While waiting for a response, he observed how the lioness tried unsuccessfully to stand. Her breathing was labored, and Ernesto calculated that without intervention, she would die within days, perhaps hours. The radio crackled again. "Authorization granted. The veterinary team is on its way. But Ramírez, if she's not the Queen, I'll take responsibility," he replied, knowing this would mean an official reprimand and possibly a sanction. The veterinary team, led by Dr. Amina Kalu, arrived 40 minutes later. By then, Ernesto had established a security perimeter and was keeping curious tourists at a distance. "My goodness, Ernesto, always getting into trouble," commented Amina with a tired smile as she prepared the tranquilizer dart rifle. "Are you sure it's worth it? This lioness has one foot in the grave. We all deserve dignity in our final days, don't you think?" he replied, helping her with the equipment. "Besides, look at those scars. She survived a lot. She deserves our help." The dart hit its mark, and in less than 5 minutes, the lioness was unconscious. The initial examination confirmed Ernesto's fears: advanced age, severe malnutrition, infection in the hind leg, and several broken or missing teeth that would prevent her from hunting effectively even if she recovered. "She won't survive in the wild," Amina declared. "And what do you propose?" "Let's take her to the sanctuary. suggested Ernesto, referring to the fenced area of the reserve where they temporarily kept animals in recovery. We give her antibiotics, hydrate her, feed her for a few weeks, and then whatever God wills. The first week was critical. Ernesto practically moved into the small observation cabin next to the sanctuary. The lioness, whom he began calling Nala, though he would never admit it publicly, refused food and barely drank water. The infection in her leg responded slowly to antibiotics, but her spirit seemed broken. "Come on, warrior, don't give up now," Ernesto whispered each morning when he brought fresh meat and changed her water. On the 10th day, the first change occurred. Ernesto arrived at dawn to find the food plate empty. The lioness was awake, watching him from the shadow of the shelter with those amber eyes that now showed a glimmer of recognition. The following weeks brought steady improvement. The infection disappeared, the lioness regained some weight, and although she noticeably limped on her hind leg, she began to move more around the enclosure. It was during the 4th week when the unexpected happened. Ernesto was sitting outside the enclosure, about 3 meters from the fence, reviewing his notes. He had left the cabin door open to hear any sound from the sanctuary. He was so concentrated that he didn't notice the lioness silently approaching the fence until a soft growl made him look up. Nala was there, staring at him, her head slightly tilted, in a gesture he would later describe as pure intuition. Ernesto crouched down to her eye level and extended a hand toward the fence, without touching it. The lioness limped forward until her nose almost touched the metal mesh, exactly in front of Ernesto's hand. She remained like that for a few seconds, breathing in the human scent, and then, to the ranger's absolute amazement, she rubbed herself laterally against the fence, like a domestic cat seeking caresses. "No way," whispered Ernesto, wide-eyed. "What are you doing, Grandma?" During the following days, this behavior was repeated. Each time Ernesto sat near the fence, Nala would approach and rub against the wire. Soon he dared to carefully insert his fingers through the mesh, gently scratching the lioness's head, who responded with a surprisingly loud purr for an animal her size. "You're domesticating her," Amina warned during a checkup visit. "You know it's dangerous, for her and for you." "I'm not domesticating her," Ernesto defended himself. "She's the one who has decided to tolerate me. She spent her entire life in the wild, Amina. She knows perfectly well who she is and what I am." Eventually, Ernesto found a solution: the Nairobi Big Cat Sanctuary, specializing in rescued lions and leopards that couldn't return to the wild. The transfer was scheduled for 2 weeks later. On the appointed morning, Ernesto arrived early at the sanctuary to prepare Nala. For the first time since the rescue, he entered the enclosure. It was a risky procedure requiring special authorization, but he had convincingly argued that the lioness would be less stressed if he was present during sedation. Armed only with a stick to maintain some distance if necessary, Ernesto slowly entered the enclosure. Nala was lying under her favorite shelter, an elevated platform that allowed her to monitor the entire territory. Upon seeing the ranger, she got up and, to the surprise of the veterinary team watching from outside, walked directly toward him, limping but with a determined step. "Easy, little mama," murmured Ernesto, trying to keep his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Everything will be fine." What happened next left everyone present breathless. The lioness stopped in front of Ernesto, looked him in the eyes, and then, in a gesture that seemed impossible for a wild predator, lowered her head and rubbed it against the ranger's leg. Amina was ready with the dart rifle but froze at the scene. Ernesto, holding back tears of emotion, slowly crouched down and for the first time directly caressed Nala's head. The lioness closed her eyes and emitted that deep purr he had come to recognize as a sign of contentment. "It's time, friend," he whispered, signaling to Amina. The dart was accurate and compassionate. In minutes, Nala was deeply asleep, ready for her journey to the Nairobi sanctuary. Ernesto accompanied the transport, sitting next to the cage during the 4-hour journey, speaking to her in a low voice, though he knew she couldn't hear him. During the following months, Ernesto visited Nala every 2 weeks, driving the 4 hours from Tsavo to Nairobi on his days off. On each visit, the lioness recognized him immediately and approached the fence to greet him with the same ritual. It was during one of these visits, 6 months after the rescue, when something happened that Ernesto could only describe as miraculous. He had brought a fellow ranger, David Dulu, to show him how Nala was progressing. As they watched the lioness rest in the sun, David casually commented, "You know, I think she really is the queen of Tsavo." "Why do you say that?" asked Ernesto, surprised. "Look at that crescent-shaped scar on her left ear. It's characteristic of her, and that dark spot on her muzzle too. I was reviewing old photos this morning before coming." Ernesto felt a chill. If she really was the legendary queen, then she wasn't just any lioness. She was a matriarch who had raised generations of cubs, who had survived countless challenges, who had been photographed by tourists from around the world. "David, do you have those photos?" His colleague took out his phone and showed him images of the queen taken over the years. The similarity was undeniable. The same markings, the same bone structure, even the same look of quiet dignity. "It's her," confirmed Ernesto, with a lump in his throat. "I've rescued a living legend." The news spread quickly. The confirmation that the famous Queen of Tsavo had been rescued and now lived in the sanctuary attracted the attention of national and international media. National Geographic sent a team to document the story. For Ernesto, however, the most important thing came 3 weeks after the discovery. One morning, he received a call from McKenna. "De Ramirez, remember I told you you'd be responsible if the lioness wasn't the queen?" "Yes, I remember," he replied, preparing for the worst. "Well, now that we know it's her, the board has decided you deserve recognition. They've approved funding for your trip to Mexico this year, and they want to name you Director of Big Cat Conservation Programs for the reserve." That same afternoon, Ernesto drove to the sanctuary. Upon arrival, he found Nala resting on her favorite platform, bathed in the African sunset. Seeing him, the lioness immediately stood up and walked toward the fence with that limp that was now part of her character. "Hello, Queen," Ernesto said to her, using her real title for the first time. "Guess what? We both have good news." As he scratched the old lioness's head through the fence, Ernesto reflected on the extraordinary twists of fate. He had risked his career to save a dying animal, and that act of compassion had not only saved a living legend, but had transformed his own life. Today, 3 years after that rescue, the Queen of Tsavo continues living in the sanctuary, having become an unwitting ambassador for African lion conservation. Thousands of visitors come each year to see her, and although she remains distant with most, there's always a special moment when Ernesto Ramírez, now Director of Conservation Programs, arrives for his weekly visit. Then the old lioness limps toward the fence, emits her characteristic purr, and for a few minutes, the abyss between human and predator dissolves into a bond that transcends language and species. It's a story Ernesto frequently tells to new rangers, how an act of compassion toward a dying lioness revealed the presence of a legend everyone thought was lost, and how that fortuitous encounter forever changed the course of 2 lives seemingly destined never to cross paths.